Namaste and welcome. It is Rishi here from meditatewithrishi.com, and today we are going to be exploring the second of the 9 Indian philosophies, the Vaisheshika Philosophy. Okay, now I haven't done a video in some time, so for those of you that watch my videos continuously, I just want to apologize and thank you for your patience. I was actually a bit unwell, so thanks for your patience and waiting, and from today we're going to crack on once again. So let's get to it. Now, just a quick refresher. In the previous video we did the first philosophy, which was the Nyaya philosophy, the system of logic, the science of logic and debate, and we answered the 3 main questions. What is the cause of suffering? How to get free of suffering, and what is the nature of the self? Who am I, essentially, right? So Nyaya was saying that the cause of suffering is false knowledge, incorrect knowledge about our true nature, and how to become free of suffering is through logic, through questioning, is to arrive at the true conclusion of who we really are, essentially. So Nyaya and Vaisheshika are actually studied as a pair, okay? Because these 2 philosophies, they complement each other. So if you remember in Nyaya was giving us the 16 methods of debate, the 16 methods of how to conduct a debate. So Nyaya was teaching us how to study something, any subject, any topic, and arrive at a conclusion. And Vaisheshika actually tells us what to study. So what is it that we are studying within the object, within the topic, in order to know everything about it, okay? So that, of course, is outside the scope of this video, but today we're going to explore the 3 questions. Again, why do we suffer? Who am I? And how to become free of suffering from the Vaisheshika standpoint. Now, it's very important to remember that these 2 are studied as a pair because they complement each other, okay? So this video will be a bit heavy, so just keep your attention, be mindful throughout the video, and I will try my best to explain in as simple terms as possible, okay? So Vaisheshika was given by the sage Maharishi Kannad, okay? And let's look at the first question. So the first question is, what is the cause of suffering? So the cause of suffering, according to Vaisheshika, is actually your own karma, your own actions are the cause of suffering. So this is said to be the first philosophy in the history to really understand the science of karma. Okay, so it tells us very clearly that every karma, every action has a result. Every action has a reaction. Every effect has a cause, and every cause has an effect, essentially. So it's easy to understand why our suffering or our happiness actually comes from our own actions, because every action has a reaction. Of what size? An equal and opposite reaction. Okay? Now, it's very important to understand that the way that we speak about karma in this day and age, especially in the Western world, is kind of from a negative context. Whenever something bad happens, we say, oh, this is my karma, or karma is a fill in the blanks, right? It's important to understand this is not a negative law. This is a very, very positive law, because it is telling you that you are in control of your happiness and your suffering, right? Because through your actions, which get equal and opposite reactions, you are the master of your destiny. You have the ability to create the reality that you want. So if you are in a state of suffering right now, it may be because of your previous actions, but so what? It means that if you want happiness, if you want joy in the future, then it is you that can create that. You are not dependent on anybody else. So this is very, very important to understand. You are the master of your reality. If you want happiness, do good actions, essentially, right? So the cause of suffering is our karma. Our own actions lead us to suffering. So how do we become free of this suffering? Again, very simply, if your own actions cause the suffering, then also to become free from suffering, it is your own actions that will do that, right? Now, I've done detailed videos on this, on the law of karma. I will link them in the description box below if you want to watch them. But ultimately, it's very simple, right? So how would we define a good action? One definition that I've given in the previous video is, in the video on karma, is that a good action is one that is either it is taking you closer to spiritual understanding, or it is improving the well-being of others. That is a good action, right? But what Vaisheshika is saying is that through your, you've been taught to use logic in Nyaya, right? So through that logic, we have to become very clear about what are the actions we are doing, what are good actions essentially, and really put a microscope onto your life, onto your actions, and try to see what is causing me, what will cause me happiness in the future, what will cause me sadness in the future, and how can I essentially become a machine for creating good actions, right? This is where we have to use our logic essentially. Now, it's important to understand one thing, right? That freedom from suffering means different things to different people. So if you just want to be happy in this world, then perform good actions. But it's important to remember that even performing good actions, every action has a reaction, right? So if you continue performing actions, then you will remain in samsara. You will remain in the cycle of birth and death, right? So the highest goal that is given is moksha, which is liberation, which is freedom, not just from suffering in this world, but freedom from the cycle of life and death itself. Freedom from the cycle of life and death itself. Because ultimately, if you have taken life, it is unlikely, like the Buddha says, that you will not have suffering, right? Even when you're happy, even when you are happy, when you're enjoying something, when you're on holiday, there's a small part of your mind that is saying that, I have to go back to work, and that fear is there, right? So even that happiness is not total happiness. There is some suffering in there. So it's important to remember that if we want moksha, if we want liberation, freedom from the cycle of birth and death, right? Then we have to go beyond good and bad actions as well. What does this mean? This means that from Nyaya philosophy, Nyaya is telling us to destroy false knowledge, okay? So false knowledge is the knowledge that you are this mind and body, right? True knowledge is the knowledge that you are not this mind and body. You are the essence within. So once you realize that, right? Once you realize that you are not going to try and please your body, you're not going to try and, please the body. So if you destroy the false knowledge, you will destroy desires. If you destroy desires, then you will destroy actions. And if you destroy actions, then automatically you will destroy rebirth. Because when there are no more reactions, then there is no need for a rebirth of the soul, essentially. Okay? So I hope this makes sense. In very simple terms, you have to become very clear about the actions that you are taking. How are you behaving? Your conduct with people, right? And balance them. Balance these good and bad karmas so that you can transcend the cycle of birth and death. Okay? Alright, so we've answered what is the cause of suffering. We've answered how to become free of suffering. Now, the third and very important question. According to Vaisheshika philosophy, what is the nature of the self? Who am I? Okay? So, to understand this, it's very important to understand the theory of creation according to Vaisheshika. Okay? Now, this theory was later, rejected by other philosophies. You'll see even in modern science, this theory has been rejected. However, it's very important to know, and a lot of people in the world still think in this way. So it's going to be helpful for you to know. Okay? So what Vaisheshika is saying is that in order for creation to happen, okay, to create anything, there are three things that are necessary. Okay, there are three things necessary. There is an inherent cause. Okay, so there needs to be some material out of which creation will happen. Okay, there is a non-inherent cause. There has to be something that is making that material, a process, let's say some kind of process or action happening that is making that material. And then an efficient cause, which is what is the intelligence that is actually doing that action. Okay, so if we take an example of a pot of clay, this is the example given by Vaisheshika. Okay, to make a pot of clay, what is needed is the inherent cause, is the material that we need, which is clay itself. So to make a pot of clay, you need clay, right? The non-inherent cause. So what is the action, right? So you need a clay making pot. You need the churning of the clay making pot to actually make a pot of clay. Okay, and the last one is the efficient cause. So there needs to be a person who is who is actually sitting there and doing the molding for the pot of clay to be made, right? So the inherent cause is clay. The non-inherent cause is a clay making pot, and then the efficient cause is the person who is making it. Okay, so in the very same way, for human beings to be created, what Vaisheshika is saying, that there needs to be an inherent cause. Okay, so the material itself is needed. So this material, Vaisheshika is saying, are eternal atoms and souls, jivas. Okay, atoms and souls are needed. The non-inherent cause, the action essentially, is the joining of these. So it is saying that when an atom, which is matter essentially, the matter, right? When matter is joined with a soul, with a jiva, that will create the human being. Okay, that is what will cause the creation. And the joining is the non-inherent cause, right? Joining is essentially the action that is needed. So when atoms and souls are separate, there is no human being, there is no creation. When they are joined, the creation happens. So the joining is that cause. Okay. The efficient cause, in the clay making pot, we needed a person to actually do this joining, to do the molding, right? So here, to make the person who is, somebody has to do the joining, right? Who is doing the joining? And this is where the idea of Ishwara or God comes in, okay? So Vaisheshika is saying that there is a God out there, okay? Who is doing this joining of atoms and souls for creation of human beings, for creation, essentially. Now, there's some very interesting points to note in this philosophy. Okay, so one is that these atoms and the souls are not created by God. They are co-eternals with God. They have always been in existence. So it is kind of, this is the atomic pluralism, where they're saying that there are many different realities that are always existing. So God is always existing. Eternal souls are always existing. Eternal atoms are always existing, right? So these atoms and souls are not created by God. They have always been in existence. So God is a separate entity that will essentially join these two to create human beings, okay? And it is based on your karma, based on your actions, that you will get different births, different bodies, essentially, right? So the idea is that if you have performed very good actions, you may get birth as a human being, because the human being is the only being that has the ability to realize their self and hence attain liberation, hence attain freedom from the cycle of birth and death. Any animal, no matter how kingly their life may be, like a lion, they still do not have the ability to self-realize. So they will have to be reborn, right? Which means they will have to continue to suffer until they can attain that liberation. So this is very important to understand, right? That it is a pluralistic philosophy, right? There are atoms, there are souls, and there is God. These are all separate. They have always existed. They will always exist, essentially. Okay. Now, the other thing to note is that consciousness in this philosophy, the consciousness of the soul is only activated when it joins with the atom. So when the soul is separate, when the atom is separate, there is no consciousness. The consciousness comes as a result of joining these two. Okay. So which means that when the soul leaves the body, it loses its consciousness. It is no longer conscious, essentially. Okay. So let's now answer the final question, which is, who am I according to Vaisheshika philosophy? So very simply, who am I? You are the eternal soul. This is your true nature. You are an eternal soul, essentially, which is totally separate. This is important to note, which is totally separate from God. So in Nyaya Vaisheshika philosophy, the soul, the individual soul, the Jivatma, is separate from Ishvara, the Paramatma, right? And there is no scope here for, for them merging. There is no scope for joining, essentially. They will always be separate. So when this is liberated, it is not that it is joining with this, right? As we'll see in the later philosophies. It is probably just hanging somewhere in the universe, essentially. So this, in a nutshell, is the Nyaya Vaisheshika philosophy. Now, obviously, these philosophies have been, not completely, right, but many parts of them have been rejected by later philosophies. Even in modern science, you can see that initially we thought that, the universe is made up of atoms, right, atomic theory. But now science has realized that the atoms, they're not the smallest particle, right? Even within the atom, there is something, there is some energy, essentially. Now, the nature of that, is cannot be defined, but ultimately there is something there that has an inherent relationship, which is which is what is making up the universe, which is what is making up everything, all matter that's out there, right? So you'll see in the later philosophies how this was rejected, right? Next, we're going to do the Samkhya philosophy. Samkhya totally rejected the idea of God or Ishvara, okay? So you will get a very good understanding in Samkhya philosophy about the theory of creation, how everything actually came about. But it's obviously important to know this because a lot of the world, this is the thought there is, right? That there is some God somewhere out there and controlling everything. So it's good to know, essentially. And yes, one more distinction between Nyaya and Vaisheshika is in the Nyaya philosophy, right? So both of them accept the law of karma, both of them accept Ishvara, right? But who chooses what body you get, what birth you get in the next life? So in the Nyaya philosophy, it is Ishvara, it is God that is deciding, what body, what new birth you're going to get. But in the Vaisheshika philosophy, it is actually the law of karma that is the deciding factor. So the law of karma is intelligent enough to, make the calculations and give you the right next birth, regardless of whether God wants that or not, essentially. So the law of karma is the deciding factor in Vaisheshika, okay? So I think this is plenty. This is enough for you to understand the three main questions in this philosophy. Next, we will cover the Samkhya philosophy. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Namaste.